Imagine you are standing on a stone wall slick with rain and blood. Your hands are numb. Your throat is raw from screaming orders that no one can hear anymore. Below you, the river is choked with bodies. Not Roman bodies. Yours. And on the far bank, they are laughing. Men with iron rings in their hair. Axes wet and red. Eyes empty. You have spent your entire life believing the Roman Empire is eternal. That its walls cannot fall. That barbarians break themselves against Roman stone like waves against a cliff. So here is the impossible question. If Rome is invincible, why are you about to watch it beg for mercy? You think this is just another siege. You think you know how this ends. You are wrong. Because what you are about to hear is the story of the moment Rome became afraid. Not annoyed. Not challenged. Terrified. And once that fear is born, it never leaves. Stay with me. Because in the next hour, you will witness 5 moments so brutal that chroniclers later refused to write them down. You will see a city open its gates to save itself, and doom itself instead. You will meet a Roman commander who did everything right and still lost everything. You will hear how one Viking leader turned a lie, a corpse, and a church ritual into the most devastating psychological weapon Rome had ever faced. You will watch disciplined Roman soldiers break, not from defeat, but from horror. And at the very end, you will learn why this single siege changed Roman military doctrine forever, and why the empire never looked at the north the same way again. But first, we have to go back to a river that smelled like rot and fear. The Seine. You are a Roman citizen in the 9th century. You don't call yourself Roman out of nostalgia. You call yourself Roman because Rome still exists. Because the empire still claims you. Because law, order, walls, taxes, bishops, soldiers, this is the Roman world. And the city ahead of you is Paris. Not the Paris of cathedrals and cafes. This is a hard, compact, river-locked fortress. Stone walls. Watchtowers. A bridge that controls everything. Paris is not just a city. It is a choke point. And beyond the river bend, something is coming. At first, it's just shapes on the water. Low silhouettes. Too many to count. Then the sound reaches you. Wood knocking against wood. Oars biting into the river in perfect rhythm. Not chaotic. Not wild. Disciplined. Someone next to you whispers a word they shouldn't know. Northmen. Vikings. You've heard stories, of course. Everyone has. Monasteries burned. Priests nailed to doors. Children taken north and never seen again. But stories are safe. Stories happen far away. This is real. And it is happening here. Hundreds of ships slide into view. Dragon heads. Black sails. Shields painted like staring eyes. There are so many that the river itself seems to shrink in fear. A Roman officer named Odo stands on the wall. He is young. Too young for what is about to be demanded of him. He smells pitch from the torches. Wet wool. The sharp copper stink of fear. Behind him, civilians are praying. Not quietly. Not politely. They are begging God like he is the last soldier left. Odo has read the old texts. Caesar. Vegetius. The manuals of war. They all say the same thing. Hold the walls. Starve the enemy. Time is your ally. But none of those books ever mention this. The Vikings do not rush. They do not shout. They wait. That's the first thing that unsettles him. They are patient. A man steps forward on one of the ships. Tall. Wrapped in furs. A scar runs down his face like a crack in stone. This is Ragnar, or Rollo, or one of the men whose names Rome will never agree on. To the Romans, it doesn't matter. He is death wearing a human shape. He raises his hand. The river goes silent. And then the message comes. Gold. Food. Hostages. Open the gates, or we take the city apart stone by stone. Odo laughs. He has to. Because if he doesn't, he might scream. Paris has held before. Rome has paid before. Tribute is cheaper than rebuilding cities. But something feels wrong. These men aren't here to raid and leave. They are here to stay. And as the first Viking ships begin to land, as ladders are unloaded, as siege engines, yes, siege engines, are dragged onto Roman soil, Odo realizes something horrifying. These barbarians have learned. This is not a raid. This is a siege. And Rome is not ready. You think it can't get worse? Wait. Because the first attack is not against the walls. It's against the mind. The Vikings drag prisoners forward. Monks. Merchants. A Roman soldier captured upriver. They kill them slowly. Methodically. In full view of the walls. Bones snap. Blood runs into the river. And the Vikings cheer, not wildly, but rhythmically. Like soldiers. A Roman archer vomits over the parapet. Another drops his bow and starts praying. This is when the first human story begins. A woman named Adela is inside the city. She is not a soldier. She is a baker's wife. She presses her son's face into her chest so he doesn't see what's happening on the walls. She can hear it anyway. The screams carry. She thinks of Rome as a mother, a protector, an idea that cannot fail. And for the first time in her life, she wonders if Rome can die. Odo orders the gates sealed, the bridges raised, boiling oil prepared. This is Roman warfare, civilized warfare. And when the Vikings finally attack, it works. Arrows fall like rain. Stones crush skulls. Men scream as oil eats through skin. The Vikings die by the dozens. For a moment, just a moment, hope returns. Odo smiles. Rome still remembers how to kill. But then something happens that no one expects. The Vikings don't retreat. They don't panic. They step over the dead. They drag the wounded back, not to save them, but to finish them. Cleanly. Deliberately. No fear. No hesitation. And then they do something that chills the defenders more than any scream. They start building. Fortifications. Ramps. Siege towers. These men were supposed to be raiders. Savages. Instead, they are engineers. A Roman veteran named Marcus watches from the wall. He has fought Franks. Saxons. Rebels. He has never felt this before. This isn't battle. This is pressure. Days pass. Food is rationed. Water turns foul. The smell inside the city becomes unbearable. And every morning, the Vikings are closer. They test the walls. Probe weaknesses. Learn. At night, they sing. Low. Deep. Funeral songs. Not for themselves. For the city. Here is the first false ending. On the seventh day, a messenger arrives. Imperial authority. Royal seal. Relief is coming. An army. Rome will answer. The city erupts in cheers. People cry. Kiss the stones. Thank God. Odo closes his eyes for the first time in days. They've held. They've won. Except, the Vikings hear it too. And they smile. Because they weren't here to win fast. They were here to win completely. And what happens next? What happens next makes even hardened Roman soldiers wish they were already dead. Because the siege is only beginning. And Rome is about to learn the difference between fighting men and fighting monsters. The cheering dies faster than it was born. Relief armies have a way of existing only in the imagination. Odo knows this. Every commander knows this. But hope is a drug, and the city is addicted. Inside Paris, people begin to act like survivors instead of besieged prey. They eat more than their rations. They argue in the streets. They talk about rebuilding roofs that haven't even collapsed yet. Odo doesn't join them. He stands on the wall long after night falls, staring at the Viking campfires. There are more of them now. That shouldn't be possible. He counts ships again. And again. They keep increasing. That's when the first sick thought creeps into his mind. What if Paris is not the target? What if Paris is the trap? The Vikings don't attack the next morning. They don't even approach the walls. They dismantle part of their camp. Roman scouts report movement up and down the river. Small groups leaving. Others arriving. It looks like logistics. Supply lines. A word that should not apply to barbarians. Odo summons his officers. Veterans. Men who still believe discipline can solve anything. They're settling in, one of them says quietly. No one laughs. Inside the city, Adela wakes to the sound of church bells. Not celebration. Alarm. She rushes outside with her son wrapped in a blanket. People are running, not screaming yet, just fast enough to feel panic clawing at their backs. On the wall, a Roman soldier is shaking. They brought priests, he says. From the north. That makes no sense. Vikings don't bring priests. Then Odo sees it. A procession crossing the riverbank. Men in robes. A cross raised high. And behind them, Vikings. The city freezes. The priests approach the gates and shout in broken Latin. They demand entry. They claim conversion. They claim peace. Odo feels something cold slide down his spine. This has happened before. Not here. But elsewhere. A Viking leader once pretended to die, demanded baptism, and used the funeral procession to infiltrate a city. It worked. Cities burned. Odo orders the gates sealed tighter. No one enters. No one leaves. The priests keep shouting. The Vikings kneel. They pray. Actually pray. Some of the civilians on the walls begin to murmur. What if it's real? What if God has softened their hearts? Odo turns on them like a wolf. This is war, he snaps. God doesn't negotiate through men with axes. The priests leave. The Vikings stand. And then the river erupts. Boats surge forward from upstream and downstream simultaneously. Hidden. Timed. The Vikings weren't waiting for relief forces. They were waiting for distraction. They slam into the bridges. Roman engineers rush to burn them, but it's too late. Hooks bite into stone. Ropes tighten. The bridge groans like a dying animal. This is the second human story. Marcus, the veteran, has been assigned to the bridge tower. He feels the vibration through his boots before he sees it. The Vikings are pulling. Not charging. Pulling. Using the river itself as leverage. The bridge collapses in sections, stone cracking, men screaming as they fall into the water and disappear beneath shields and oars. Marcus fights hand to hand for the first time in years. He kills a man with a spear thrust to the throat. The Viking doesn't scream. He smiles. Marcus hesitates. That hesitation nearly kills him. By nightfall, part of the bridge is gone. Not captured. Destroyed. Paris is still holding. But now it's bleeding. Odo orders counterattacks. Fire ships. Raids at dawn. They fail. The Vikings adapt instantly. They counteraid. They ambush. They learn Roman signals and use them against Roman troops. Every day, the walls creep closer to irrelevance. And then comes the sickness. Bodies rot in the river. Water becomes poison. Dysentery spreads. Children die quietly in their sleep. Adela loses her neighbor's daughter. A girl who used to steal warm bread from her shop. They bury her at night because there's no space left. Inside the Viking camp, something else is happening. This is where you meet him properly. The leader. He is called Rollo by some. Hrolf by others. A man too big for his own ships. But before he is a terror. He is a boy. He grew up hungry. Not metaphorically. Actually hungry. Winters where the sea froze and fish vanished. A father who died in a feud no one remembered the cause of. A mother who taught him that mercy was a luxury for men who could afford it. Rollo learned early that fear was faster than respect. He watched chiefs fail because they hesitated. Because they treated enemies like humans. He decided never to make that mistake. And now he stands before Paris, not as a raider, but as a king in waiting. He does not want gold. He wants recognition. Rome does not understand this. Rome thinks every enemy wants money or land. Rollo wants legitimacy. He wants the empire to look at him and admit something unthinkable. That he is their equal. This is why the siege does not end. This is why it escalates. The Romans attempt diplomacy. Envoys go out under truce. They bring gold. Promises. Rollo laughs. Not mockingly. Sadly. You pay me to leave, he says. I pay you to exist. The envoys return pale and shaking. Odo realizes the truth. Paris is not being attacked. It is being tested. How long can Rome endure humiliation? Another false ending arrives. Imperial banners appear on the horizon. Actual ones this time. A relief army. Cheers erupt again. This time, Odo does not smile. The Vikings withdraw from the walls. They form ranks. They allow the army to approach. That's the mistake. The Roman relief force is confident. Too confident. They've beaten barbarians before. They charge. The Vikings split. Lure them into marshland. Axes rise. Shields lock. The Roman line collapses in minutes. Men drown in mud. Horses scream. From the walls, the city watches their salvation die. The Vikings take heads. They send them floating downriver toward Paris. This is the moment Rome truly breaks. Inside the city, discipline dissolves. Fights over food. Thefts. Desperation. A priest is beaten to death over a sack of grain. Odo executes 3 soldiers to restore order. It barely works. Marcus is wounded. A deep cut in his thigh. He keeps fighting because stopping means dying. Adela's son stops asking questions. That terrifies her more than the screams. Weeks pass. Then months. Winter approaches. The Vikings don't leave. They build shelters. They hunt. They fish. They are not starving. Paris is. And then, the lowest point. The Vikings breach an outer wall section. Just a section. Enough. They pour in. Street fighting erupts. Fire spreads. Marcus is there when a Viking crushes a child's skull with a shield. Something inside him snaps. He kills without thinking. Odo personally leads a counterattack and pushes them back. Barely. The breach is sealed with bodies. The city survives. But at a cost. Odo stands alone afterward, covered in blood that isn't his. He realizes something devastating. Even if Paris survives, Rome has already lost. Because an enemy that can do this, can do it again. And next time, there might be no wall left to hide behind. But then, something unexpected happens. A mistake. A forgotten trick. Something buried in Roman doctrine. And Viking arrogance. And when it unfolds, it will turn terror into slaughter. And make the river remember this siege forever. By the time winter truly arrives, Paris no longer smells like a city. It smells like an animal that knows it is dying. Smoke clings to everything. Rot lives in the streets. The river, the same river that once fed trade and prayer, has become a slow-moving grave. Odo has stopped sleeping. When he closes his eyes, he hears the bridge collapsing again. He hears the cheers of the Vikings. He hears the moment the relief army died. And worst of all, he hears silence. Because silence means they are planning. Inside the city, order exists only because exhaustion has replaced panic. People no longer scream. They whisper. Adela trades bread for scraps of dried meat. She has learned which corners are safe and which ones are ruled by men with knives and empty eyes. Her son doesn't cry anymore. That frightens her more than hunger. Marcus limps now. His wound never healed properly. Every step is pain. But pain means he's still alive. He's been a soldier for 30 years. He has served emperors whose names no one remembers. He never imagined dying like this, slowly, behind walls, watching barbarians outthink Rome. And that thought, outthink, is what finally breaks something open inside Odo. Because Rome has always believed one thing above all else. That it wins by being smarter. Not stronger. Not more savage. Smarter. Odo retreats to a tower overlooking the river. He brings maps. Old scrolls. Manuals written by men who fought wars centuries ago. Most of it is useless. But then he finds it. A forgotten passage. A footnote, really. Barely legible. A description of river warfare during the late Empire. A tactic abandoned because it was inelegant. Too risky. Too brutal. Too Roman. Odo reads it again. And again. His officers think he's lost his mind when he explains it. No, one of them says. That's suicide. It's impossible, says another. Odo doesn't argue. He just asks a question. Do you see another way we survive? Silence. This is the insane plan nobody believes. Paris cannot outfight the Vikings. It cannot outlast them. So Odo decides to do the one thing Rome has always despised. He decides to fight like them. The plan is simple in concept. Horrifying in execution. The Vikings rely on the river. It is their road. Their supply line. Their escape. Odo will turn it into a weapon. At night, under freezing rain, Roman soldiers drag hulks of old ships, broken wagons, and stones into the water upstream. They build a trap. Not a wall. A choke. The Vikings don't notice at first. Why would they? They own the river. Or so they think. Then comes the first attention reset moment. Because what happens next makes even hardened soldiers feel sick. Odo orders bodies, Roman bodies, weighted with iron, dumped into the river at key points. Not as waste. As anchors. The river begins to slow. To change. Ice forms thicker in places it shouldn't. Currents shift. The Vikings notice when one of their ships runs aground where water should be deep. They laugh at first. Then another ship sticks. Then another. By the time they understand, it's too late. Odo waits. He waits for arrogance to finish the work. One night, during a storm that howls like something alive, the Vikings attempt to reposition their fleet. The river betrays them. Ships collide. Oars snap. Men fall into black water and vanish. That's when Odo strikes. Fire arrows streak from the walls, not aimed at men, but at ships that cannot move. Pitch ignites. The river catches fire. You think you've heard screaming before? This is different. Men burn alive while trapped by armor and ice-cold water. They jump to escape flames and drown. They try to swim and freeze. Marcus is there, watching from the bank, his jaw clenched so hard it bleeds. This isn't war, someone whispers. Marcus doesn't answer. Because it is war. Just not the kind Rome likes to admit it can fight. This is the miracle twist. For the first time since the siege began, the Vikings are afraid. Not panicked. Afraid. Rollo watches his ships burn. He understands instantly what this means. Paris has not just resisted. It has adapted. That night, Viking songs stop. For the first time in months, the city hears nothing but wind. Adela sleeps for hours without waking. When she opens her eyes, she cries, not because she's safe, but because she remembers what safety felt like. The Vikings retaliate. Of course they do. They launch furious assaults. Throw everything they have at the walls. But something has changed. Their timing is off. Their coordination frays. They rush. They make mistakes. Rome feeds on mistakes. Marcus leads a sortie with men half his age. He moves like an old machine, but his blade still knows where to go. They take heads. They take prisoners. This is the first time Roman soldiers bring Vikings back alive. And when the city sees them, blooded, bound, human, something dangerous happens. Hope turns into rage. Odo has to order executions before the crowd tears them apart. Rollo calls a council. His lieutenants argue. Some want to leave. Some want to burn everything and retreat. Rollo listens. And says nothing. Because he knows something they don't. If he leaves now, he is just another raider. If he wins, he becomes history. So he decides on total disaster. The final push. A gamble so brutal it will either break Paris, or break the Viking host forever. He orders the construction of siege towers larger than anything they've attempted. He strips nearby villages bare. Food, timber, slaves. Everything goes into this. Paris watches the towers rise. Each one a moving nightmare. Odo knows this is the endgame. He has one chance left. He orders something that will haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. No prisoners. No mercy. When the towers roll forward, the world narrows. Marcus is on the wall when the first tower touches stone. Hooks fly. Ladders slam. Vikings pour up like ants. Hand-to-hand fighting erupts at arm's length. Teeth. Fists. Daggers. Adela hides with her son in a cellar as the city shakes. Above her, buildings burn. This is the lowest point again. A second false ending. The Vikings breach the inner wall. They are inside the city. Rollo steps onto Roman ground. He smells victory. And then, the trap closes. Odo had left parts of the city empty on purpose. Wide streets. Barricaded alleys. The Vikings push forward. And find themselves funneled. Roman troops collapse in from hidden positions. Fire. Boiling water. Stones from above. Marcus kills a man by smashing his face into a wall until it caves. He doesn't remember doing it. The Vikings fight like demons. But demons bleed. The slaughter lasts hours. By dawn, the streets are slick. And the river. The river is red again. Rollo barely escapes. He watches from a distance as his greatest gamble fails. Not completely. But enough. Enough to teach him something he never wanted to learn. Rome can be hurt. But it can also learn. And that makes it dangerous. The siege does not end in victory. It ends in exhaustion. In negotiation. In a bargain that will echo for centuries. And the aftermath. The aftermath will change the empire forever. Because Rome did not forget this fear. It institutionalized it. By the time the killing stops, no one feels victorious. That's the first truth Rome never liked to admit. The streets of Paris are quiet again, but it is not the quiet of safety. It is the quiet of a battlefield after the scavengers have fed. Bodies lie where they fell. Some Roman. Some Viking. Many so damaged you can't tell which side they belong to. Dogs roam freely now, stepping over armor, sniffing hands that will never move again. Marcus sits against a shattered wall, his sword still in his hand. He doesn't remember sitting down. He doesn't remember the last man he killed. He just remembers the sound. Bone against stone. Again. Again. Until the sound changed. He vomits. Not from fear. From relief. Adela emerges from the cellar when the fires die down. She carries her son like he's made of glass. They step into a city she barely recognizes. The bakery is gone. The church roof has collapsed. The street where she met her husband is buried under rubble and blood. But she is alive. And in this moment, that feels like guilt. On the walls, Odo stands surrounded by officers who look 10 years older than they did yesterday. The Vikings have withdrawn to their camp. Not fleeing. Not retreating. Waiting. That's when the messengers come. White cloths. Open hands. Negotiation. Rome has won. But not enough to destroy them. And the Vikings know it. Rollo enters the city under truce. He does not bow. He does not threaten. He walks through the streets slowly, deliberately, letting Romans see him. Letting them look into his eyes. He sees fear there. But not submission. That impresses him. Odo meets him near the shattered bridge. They stand facing each other, two men carrying the weight of thousands of dead. Rollo speaks first. "You fight well," he says. Odo does not thank him. You came to take, Odo replies. You failed. Rollo smiles faintly. I came to be known, he says. And now I am. This is the bargain. Rome will pay. Not just gold. Not just food. Something far more dangerous. Land. Recognition. Rollo will leave Paris. But not empty-handed. He will be granted territory further downriver. A place to settle. To rule. In exchange, he will defend the river from other Vikings. From his own people. Odo understands instantly what this means. Rome is about to do something it swore it never would again. It is about to legitimize the enemy. But Rome is tired. Rome is bleeding. And Rome is afraid. The agreement is signed. The siege ends not with trumpets, but with silence. The Vikings break camp. They leave behind graves, burned ships, and a memory that will not fade. As they march away, Roman civilians watch from the walls. Some spit. Some pray. Some just stare. Marcus watches too. He feels no joy. Only a deep, unsettling certainty. This will not be the last time. And he is right. Because what Rome has just done, what history will later call pragmatic, is plant a seed. That seed will become Normandy. A Viking kingdom carved out of Roman fear. Rome will tell itself this was a victory. Chroniclers will soften the language. They will talk about resilience. About divine favor. They will not talk about the bodies in the river. They will not talk about the moment Rome realized its walls were not enough. Odo remains in Paris after the siege. He is praised. Promoted. But at night, he dreams of fire on water. He dreams of ships that do not sink. He knows the truth. Rome survived not because it was eternal, but because it was willing to become something darker. Adela rebuilds. She opens a smaller bakery near the river. She never lets her son play near the water. He asks why. She tells him a story. About monsters that came on ships. And men who stopped them. She leaves out the part where the monsters were also men. Marcus leaves the army. He cannot stand the smell of wet leather anymore. He spends his days repairing boats. Ironically, when people ask him about the siege, he says very little. Just one thing. They learned from us, he says. And we learned from them. And that is what Rome never wanted the world to know. Because this siege did not just terrify the empire. It changed it. After Paris, Roman defenses change. Rivers are fortified. Bridges redesigned. Northern borders hardened. Rome no longer assumes barbarians are stupid. It assumes they are watching. Learning. Waiting. This is the brutal aftermath. But history hides one final truth. The siege of Paris did not end Viking ambition. It taught them exactly how to extract power from Rome without destroying it. And once that lesson was learned, it could never be unlearned. Which brings us to the final question. Why does this siege still matter? Why should you care about a frozen river and a half-forgotten city? Because this is the moment the medieval world is born. Not with a coronation. Not with a treaty. But with fear. And in the final moments of this story, you will understand why the Roman Empire was never the same again. Why every wall built afterward carried the memory of dragon ships. Why even centuries later, Rome still looked north with dread. And why now? You know a story 99% of people will never hear. When the Vikings disappear downriver, Paris does not celebrate. That tells you everything. There are no triumphal marches. No great hymns of victory. No illusion that something glorious has happened. Instead, there is counting. Counting the dead. Counting the missing. Counting how many winters it will take before the city feels human again. The river keeps flowing, indifferent, carrying pieces of the siege with it. Splintered wood, broken shields, things no one wants to name. Odo walks the walls one last time before leaving the city. Every stone feels different now. Before the siege, these walls were symbols. Ideas made of rock. Now they are scars. He stops where the bridge once stood and looks down at the water. He remembers the moment the river burned. He remembers giving the order. And for the rest of his life, whenever someone calls him a hero, something inside him quietly disagrees. Because heroes don't do what he did. Survivors do. Rome will later write that the siege was a test of faith. That God protected the city. That the empire endured. That is not a lie. But it is not the truth either. The truth is harder. The truth is that Rome survived because it compromised something sacred. Its sense of superiority. For centuries, Rome believed it stood at the center of the world. That everyone else existed on the edge of civilization, waiting to be taught, conquered, or dismissed. The Vikings shattered that illusion. Not by conquering Rome, but by forcing Rome to negotiate, to bargain, to recognize. That is why this siege terrified the empire. Not because of the blood. Not because of the destruction. But because of what it proved. That Rome could be trapped. Outthought. Outweighted. And that some enemies did not want to destroy Rome. They wanted to become part of it. Adela's son grows up hearing stories about the siege. He learns which streets burned. Which towers held. But what stays with him isn't the battles. It's the silence afterward. The way adults flinched when ships appeared on the river, even merchant ships. The way bells rang differently after that year. Fear changes a culture. It lingers. Marcus lives long enough to hear people argue about whether the Vikings were truly barbarians. He never joins those arguments. Because he remembers the way they adapted. The way they watched. The way they learned. He knows the uncomfortable truth. Civilization is not a shield. It is a toolbox. And anyone can learn how to use it. Rollo, now a ruler, now a Christian, now something Rome can pretend to understand, never forgets Paris either. He tells his men the story in reverse. Not as a failure, but as proof. Proof that Rome bleeds. Proof that patience works. Proof that fear is a currency more valuable than gold. The descendants of those Vikings will become nobles. Dukes. Defenders of the very empire that once trembled at their approach. History will call this progress. But you know better now. You know it began with terror. With fire on water. With a city that held not because it was invincible, but because it was willing to change. That is the legacy of the siege that made the Roman Empire afraid. Not the fall of a city. The loss of certainty. And once certainty dies, the world becomes something else. More dangerous. More fluid. More human. So the next time someone tells you Rome fell because it grew weak, remember Paris. Remember the siege that forced Rome to stare into the future and blink. And remember this. Empires do not die when they are defeated. They die when they realize they are no longer unique. You now know the real story. One buried under treaties, softened by chroniclers, and ignored by most of history. But once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. And neither could Rome.